Colonel Rob Maness has a lifelong record of providing dedicated service to this nation. Having worked his way up from the enlisted ranks to full colonel, he served our country for more than 32 years. He has served as a bomber squadron commander, bomb disposal technician, Joint Chiefs of Staff Operations Officer, assisted the national security team with the campaign plan for the global war on terrorism. He authored the first theater nuclear war plan and served as the vice commander of America's largest airborne intelligence wing. Colonel Rob Maness is a true American hero. This is Rob Maness Live.
78 countries, 330 million Christians being persecuted around the world. It is the most persecuted religion across the Middle East and Africa and elsewhere. And to your point, relative silence from the international community. It is in the UN Charter as a basic human right. It's one of the things that Nicki Minaj is going to come over, and we're going to have her talk to the UN, talk to our experts, and actually hear from some of these pastors and others that have been so horribly persecuted. And I really welcome her engagement and her spotlight.
Well, welcome back to Whistleblower Wednesday. The Rob Maness Show is live on Worldview Tube and our X Spaces simulcast. Well, just in time for Christmas, we are seeing a spike in Christian persecution, not just here in this country, but worldwide. It's not just in Nigeria, but from Quebec's sweeping ban on public prayer to arrests in the United Kingdom and France for silent intercession, and the staggering death toll in Nigeria, where over 7,000 Christians have been murdered this year alone. Our guest today is a retired corporate attorney with decades at the top of that field, a committed Catholic Christian, and the best-selling author of a book called Canon Crossfire, now the #1 book in Christian canon on Amazon. His name is Matthew McWhorter, and he's here to unpack one of the most urgent issues facing believers today, this global rise of Christian persecution. Matthew brings both legal precision and biblical depth. He warns that governments are codifying the suppression of faith, eroding conscience and speech in ways that threaten the very foundation of liberty. But Matthew doesn't just speak as a lawyer. He speaks as a scholar of the early church, and he reminds us, and I quote, "The original church was a martyr church. Pagans became Christians knowing they'd be killed for it. That's the legacy we inherit and the cycle we're entering again," close quote. Stay with us as we dive into the legal, historical, and spiritual dimensions of this unfolding crisis, what it means for every believer today. Matthew, welcome to the Rob Maness Show.
Thank you. God bless. Happy to be here. And a shout out. My brother was EOD Air Force, so you don't often meet those people out there. So shout out to you for that.
Oh, yeah. Well, thank you very much. Was he enlisted?
Yeah, exactly. 1988 through probably 2010 or something like that.
Okay. Well, I was 79 to 1986 myself as an enlisted EOD troop. Unfortunately, I went and got commissioned, so I missed it.
we all make mistakes. I went to law school, so we all screw up.
Yeah, exactly right. My last job in the Air Force, though, was the commander of Kirtland Air Force Base, and our EOD flight there, I was very proud of this, and still am, was named the best EOD flight in the Air Force, and one of the staff sergeants was named as one of the 12 outstanding Airmen of the Year, which is very hard to do, and they were in combat all the time. I was rotating them in and out pretty rapidly out of Afghanistan and Iraq. So God bless.
Well done. Yeah, God bless.
Yeah, well done. So Matthew, I'm excited about this show because I don't often get somebody that's not a theologian necessarily by profession, but became one afterwards, kind of like I've become a media type person in the communications field. And your book, I love the prospect of, I haven't had a chance to read the book. I've skimmed some of it and everything, but I want to take this subject today and let's work from the big picture down to the small picture for this first segment. Worldwide, as Ambassador Waltz was so rightly pointing out, Christian persecution at every level, whether it's physical, mental, political, or spiritual, is rapidly on the rise here. And the last week just proves it too. What are your thoughts on where we're at this moment in time and what's on the horizon from a global perspective?
Exactly. So I come to it as a skeptic. I did research into the very earliest days of Christianity, and I was amazed to find out that Christianity, I mean, you kind of hear that there were martyrs in the early church. It was a martyr church. And once I learned that, I started looking at the history of Christianity, even from the early church onward, and it's just cycle after cycle. And I feel like we are in a rising cycle of persecution, that it is growing worldwide. It comes in different forms. And while, in the United States, the very worst forms of persecution have not yet occurred, you see plenty of lesser forms of persecution out there. So I think of it as kind of on three levels. There's government persecution that affects hundreds of millions of people around the world. That's where the government itself is anti-Christian and trying to stamp it out or otherwise persecute the Christian people within its borders. You have then sort of third-party criminal persecution, which is where maybe the government's not supporting it, but criminal activity, arson, murder, etc., is being perpetrated by people within the government's borders. And then there's a third kind, which I think we do see here in the West and increasing in the West. And, people don't focus on it as much. It doesn't make as big of a media impact. But, as you were mentioning right there are our closest countries, the countries with the closest culture and legal system like ours are now arresting people for private prayer, for silently praying to themselves. And that is now a crime in those countries. And that sort of thing where they're not being tortured, they're not being killed, but they are under persecution. And people need to recognize that that's starting to rise in our society, because these laws, they're never passed off as an act to persecute Christians. It's actually passed off as an act to protect religious freedom, right? Or freedom of consciousness. But what it actually ends up doing is being a law that says if you silently pray to yourself, we'll arrest you. And that's mind-boggling that could be going on in England and other countries now.
It's literally a thought crime.
Totally.
I mean, our First Amendment is designed
when you first hear it, you think it's a joke, don't you?
Yeah, yeah. Our First Amendment is designed to prevent legislation from being passed at the federal level that creates a thought crime. But we've seen hate speech legislation passed, and that type of legislation is, even in this country. I ran against Bill Cassidy, who is a dastardly senator from Louisiana now. Unfortunately, I couldn't keep him out of that seat, and he voted to convict Donald Trump in the second impeachment. But he and his ilk passed. He voted for hate speech laws, which are being used to suppress people on social media. Just the fact that a hate speech law was passed in the United States, the social media oligarchs think that they can suppress your speech on social media. And look, I was raised in a country like you where the ACLU defended the KKK's right to speak. Now they want to go hang them. Now they preach, that group preaches to go hang people like that. And it has gotten worse because they named Charlie Kirk and Turning Point USA as a hate group on the equivalent of the KKK, the SPLC does, the Southern Poverty Leadership Center. It's crazy,
and that's the system,
what has happened.
Right? And that's the system, right? They pass it off as a good law. They pass it off as reasonable, and they portray, something that is in our minds and throughout all of American history, perfectly reasonable, is then stretched as if that's the real problem and the real, evil in our society that needs to be suppressed. So it's that method that identifies something as something that it's not. It labels something in a way to make people think that what's going on is perfectly reasonable and rational behavior when it's not. It is an absolute persecution, as you say, of freedom of speech, freedom of thought, and the freedom of religion. And too often people end up being on the sidelines of these issues because they bought into the story, the narrative that actually that law was a good thing when all it is persecution.
It's like gun control laws, you know. Uh, they always use the language, well, gun safety. We need gun safety laws. Look, I'm 64, but my older brothers are 3 and 4 years older than me, and I know that when they were in elementary school and junior high and high school, there were gun safety classes in public schools where they were going to school, and every kid that drove a pickup truck to school, and most of them did, had a gun, a loaded gun, hanging in the back window and didn't lock the doors on it. So that's gun safety right there. But these people, they want to prevent you from being able to defend yourselves from the people that go beyond laws and go beyond non-violent persecution. The people that want to kill you, like what we just saw happen in Australia. Where they have had their guns taken away from them. And in the irony of ironies, the senior perpetrator, jihadist in the Australia killings of the Jewish people on the Bondi Beach was licensed to own 6 guns because he had been through the screening process where most Australians can't even own a gun anymore.
Exactly. And that's another form, is this sort of unequal treatment and unequal way that the laws are enforced, where, the guy who perpetrates the crime on Christians manages to get through the system. The Christians cannot get through the system, that sort of thing. And it, as I say, it is a form of persecution. It is much more widespread, even in Western countries, places that we think of as civilized and orderly and respectful of rights. It's this disparate treatment can make it look like they are, look, you can get a permit, except you can't get a permit, right? It looks like you can, but you can't. And that sort of thing is the stuff that people have to be focused on and paying attention to, or it just takes over your society. Because, as you say, they dress it up in different language, they misportray what something really is, and they get people to just not be opposed to them. That's all it takes. They railroad through a piece of legislation, and the next thing you know, you're a persecuted minority.
Yeah, absolutely. And Christians, I think, are the largest in numbers persecuted minority in the country, in the world today. Before we get to this first break, though, you've done a lot of deep diving and research into the Bible from many different perspectives: Old Testament, New Testament, Catholic views, Protestant views, and those kind of things. What does the Bible offer to us as believers as to how to approach an era of martyrdom like it appears that we're entering today?
Yeah, the advice is always the same at its core, which is to get back to the beginning, go back to the truth, go back to what you were taught, go back to what the Christianity began with. You'll find that even in the epistles of John and elsewhere in the Bible, that as well as the early church, as well as all the eras of persecution since then, it is to focus on what is true. Because one of the ways that people will persecute Christianity is to infiltrate and change the message and distort it. And there's like a propaganda misinformation campaigns that go on as they try to, convince people to not be real Christian, not be as Christian, or to just walk away. And that's the sort of thing you got to be on your toes and prevent.
Yeah, exactly right. I like the way you put it. Go back to the beginning. I am not a research scholar or a theologian. I've had my college educations at different levels and from different types of schools and everything. But when I think about my own personal beliefs in Christianity, that's where I always try to start from, is to go back to the beginning and have a better understanding and be able to talk about that with folks like my wife, who's my partner in this, who is unfortunately gotten to educate me on several things because she's so much smarter and in depth on it. But we got to take a break. When we come back, I'm going to show a little clip focusing on Nigeria, and I want to talk about these just tremendously deadly genocidal activities that are happening in countries like that. We'll be right back with Matthew McWhirter.
Nigeria, I mean, the fact that this issue has not gotten on people's radar.
Right, no one's talking about it.
It's pretty amazing. If you don't know what's going on in Nigeria, your media sources suck. You are in a bubble. Not, and again, I'm not a Christian, but they are systematically killing the Christians in Nigeria. They've killed over 100,000 since 2009. They've burned 18,000 churches. This is so much more. These are their Islamists, Boko Haram. This is so much more of a genocide attempt than what is going on in Gaza. They are literally attempting to wipe out the Christian population of an entire country. Where are the kids protesting this?
Yeah. Thank you. Because no one will talk about it, so thank you.
Absolutely.
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show, and we're live on Worldview Tube and our X Spaces simulcast. And the title of today's show is, Welcome to Christmas, essentially, just in time for it. Christian persecution is on the rise all around the world. And Bill Maher there was talking with Nancy Mace about the situation in Nigeria. My guest today is Matthew McWhirter, the author of Canon Crossfire, which dives deeply into the Bible and how we can look at things and should look at things. And one of the things you do, Matthew, is you explore threats to Christianity in the book, don't you? What's the approach you take there?
To be honest, if you really go back in time, the approach was accidental. Here I was as a skeptic looking into Christianity, and I just start reading things and looking into the early church. The core of my book was that I wanted to know what all the earliest Christians ever said about the books that Catholics and Protestants have, but Protestants don't, or Catholics and Orthodox have, but Protestants don't. That's the research I did. And as I'm doing that, I just wanted to find all those quotes because I didn't have a book to give it to me. So I did the work. I now give it to others. I go out and I look for that stuff, and I start looking into who these people are, right? I'm finding quotes from the earliest Christians. Who are these guys? What happened to them? What's their background with their story? And of the 10 people that you hear their names the most whenever you discuss the earliest church, 7 of them, 7 out of 10, died under torture and persecution. Only 3 out of 10 managed to escape that. That is a unbelievable number. And you start realizing who these people were, who they were preaching to. They're preaching to people who not only are facing persecution, they're preaching to people who join Christianity knowing full well that that's how it ends. They are dealing with people where, you go to church on Sunday when the troops are outside the church ready to grab you, throw you into prison, torture you, and murder you, execute you for having gone to church on Sunday. Do you go to church? That's the sort of thing that they're dealing with. Like I said, I wasn't really looking for that. I encountered it and understood, what exactly was going on. That is the actual earliest days of Christianity. Yet Christianity thrives and grows. In part, it focuses on what is true. It focuses on Christianity is true. You should be willing to, endure persecution and even to die for the truth. That is the message of the earliest Christians. Sometimes in modern societies, we don't always necessarily stress that. We stress, it's Christianity speaks to me. It's a very moral thing. It's a good way to raise your children. It's just that, yeah, it is. But the original message is much more focused on this is true. That's why we would be willing to do this.
Yeah, I did a show a couple of weeks ago, and the subject of soft Christianity or the soft Jesus versus the real Jesus came up. I always go back to the money changers incident where he whipped the money changers out of the temple. That's the Jesus that people need to be aware of the most, I think, in modern times, because there's just this overwhelming plethora of people that want to sensitize Christ and sensitize the teaching in the Bibles to make them soft. And I think that leaves Christians open to this level of persecution, especially genocide, like what we're seeing in places like Nigeria, because the perpetrators of that believe that Christians are soft instead of the tough-minded, tough-love people that believe in what Christ taught and what's written down in the Bible, and the story of his coming into being even is as much or more important in the Old Testament, in the prophets and those kind of things, and that it's not got anything to do with being soft or nice. It's got everything to do with practice this. I love you because I proved it, but you have to practice it, or you will not be, you'll be spit out in the end if you don't do that. And that's the part that I think in modern times, especially in the West and America, we have some churches that, and I mean groups of people, not necessarily building, but when I say that, that have gone this way of softness, and that's dangerous, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's, as you say, it's kind of more of a faction within every church, right?
Mm.
It's not one particular group, although sometimes they can break off or et cetera. But it's just, we all want to be nice, we all want to be good people, we all want to be understanding of the other person, and that's all a part of Christianity. That's all part true. But as you say, Jesus tells you he hates lukewarm Christians.
Mm.
Those are his words in the book of Revelations.
Yep.
Not one time does Jesus speak out against the military or soldiers. Soldiers are actually portrayed quite well in the New Testament. He didn't give you platitudes about world peace and that sort of thing. That wasn't what Jesus was actually preaching. You again, we all come to Christianity in different ways. I come late. I put an enormous amount of work into reading and understanding the Bible, and I often find that I surprise lifelong Christians because I remember things differently than they do. But like just this week, to pick something stupid, but Rob Reiner dies and Donald Trump says some nasty things about him, and people say, well, that's so unchristian. That's this. I would say it was wrong, but I would say it was impolite and rude. So that's why I would criticize Trump over it. But as far as, is that wrong? What does the Bible say about Judas? Judas died and no one was nice to him. The Bible is not necessarily saying what people think it does. And that lack of understanding of it, as you say, can lead to sort of that perception of softness, because you overemphasize one part of the message and not the whole truth, which is multifaceted. We are kind, generous people. We try to love our enemies, etc. But that doesn't mean that you don't stand up for yourself, and certainly doesn't mean that you don't stand up for others.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the Jesus not talking against soldiers or the military. He even was fairly pro-government. If the government was operating in a moral and ethical manner, he taught that you should obey the government as long as it's doing that.
Even things that were viewed as persecution, like paying the taxes. He finds the gold to pay the tax. Like, I mean, it's just not the sort of simplistic sort of message that sometimes people are trying to make him out to, that he's some sort of hippie giving this, simple message. Like, no, he was pro-government. He understood the need for a government. By all appearances, he was, as we say, pro-soldier, etc. That element of this, and those soldiers are persecuting his people, to be clear, too. Like, these are Roman soldiers you're talking about, and yet he doesn't have a word to say against them.
Yeah, it's very interesting when you think about it that way, when you look through that lens. Let me ask specifically about the book. I'm going to start this with a very simple question that's on my mind: is why the title Canon Crossfire?
So I was looking at two questions at the same time, because I had not been Christian. I was named after the Bible, luckily. I have massive health problems. And after I did, people were asking me about my bucket list. And I was like, well, I got a bunch of books I haven't read yet. And they include the books I was named after. So that's my introduction to the Bible, is I just go to Amazon to go buy it. Well, if you go onto Amazon, you discover that there's a Catholic Bible, an Orthodox Bible, a Protestant Bible, and actually within Protestants and Orthodox, there's several Bibles. And we're just talking about what books are in the Bible, let alone translations and commentaries on them. So my first question was, what Bible am I supposed to be reading? And as I started getting into that and getting into reading these books and moving forward, I started asking whether Christianity is true. And the Canon Crossfire is that conflict, that I start realizing that we're talking about the evidence for that Christianity is true, At the same time that we're talking about the evidence for these books that are in some Bibles and not other Bibles, it's the same evidence. It's the same pool of fathers talking about them, etc. There is a conflict in how you would present that case. So what I believe I've done is to show people as a lawyer who looked at this as a skeptic to say, look, this case for Christianity has a weakness in it. And the weakness is that you also, what Bible proves Christianity, what Bible can win that case has to be considered. And so that's what I'm trying to set forth for people. The key thing that I did that does, because I don't think anybody else came to Christianity quite that same way. The key thing that I did was try to find out what every Christian in the first 450 years of Christianity ever said about those books. That's what I went out to find. I assemble it for people, and now no one else ever has to do that. You can find out yourself in a few hours to a few days by reading the book. So that's what I try to show people. I leave it to the reader to make your own decisions. But the key is, what did they say? Out of curiosity, what did everybody say? Because the best Catholic or Protestant or Orthodox scholarship just quotes a few people and says, well, these guys supported us. Like, well, yeah, okay. What did everybody say, though? That's the work that a judge would want to see, and that's what I wanted to see.
Yeah, it's interesting. The subject is very interesting to me because my wife and I are both Protestants. She's from the Nazarene. I'm raised a Southern Baptist, but we have many Catholic friends from our time in Louisiana, down here on the coast of Mississippi, and everything that are close friends, and we talk about these things. And I just learned that there are books in the Bible that Catholics use that are not in the Bible that I was given as a birthday present when I was 14 years old and got saved. The big question, and this is why I'm interested in your book, and I've got to get a copy of it, is the big question in my mind, and this year too, is why is that? And you set out to answer that. Did you set out to answer that question or answer it?
Yeah, I try to give everybody the information for people to make their own choice. But like for me, coming to this, it's the most crucial question of all. What did Jesus and the apostles preach, right? And it's a huge claim to say, well, he did or he didn't. Those are massive disconnects, and yet people don't focus on it. They just accept the book they're handed. So that's what I tried. I'm like, well, I didn't come to Christianity that way. I had to research it, so let me show everybody what I found, and everybody can make their decisions from there.
Well, God's working through you to educate folks. That's what's happening here. It's fantastic. Were you an atheist before you became a Christian, or were you raised in a Christian family, or what's your background?
Not raised. Yeah, not raised Christian. So my grandfather had been Catholic. So my mom went to Catholic schools, but the nuns were mean to her and her whole family, all the kids. So they hated them. And that's pretty much what I learned about Christianity as a kid was the nuns are mean as hell. Stay away from them. So we never prayed, never read the Bible, never went to church, any of that stuff. So it was really late in life. Thankfully, she named me after the Bible, or I never would have. I truly do believe, as you were saying, that like God put me in this place where I have this legal background. I'm able to do this kind of research, inclined to do it, able to see the problem, et cetera, and analyze it, and don't really have a church recruiting me. I don't have an individual telling me just accept this one Bible. It's like, well, which one of these am I supposed to be reading? So I think that is exactly what happened.
Well, we'll talk more about that in the next segment. And the opening clip will be about South Korea, believe it or not, folks. Look, this is worldwide. This is not just in the West. So you have Eastern countries that are also persecuting Christians, even our allies. We'll be right back with Matthew McWhirter, author of Cannon Crossfire.
News is moving faster than ever, and so are we. Worldview Tube brings you 24/7 live stream coverage and now real-time alerts when it matters most. Once you have the Worldview Tube app installed, exit the app and navigate your way to Settings. In Settings, locate the tab labeled Notifications. Select the Notifications tab. Scroll down until you locate the Worldview Tube app icon. Select the tab, and here you can turn on and customize your notification experience for the Worldview Tube app. News doesn't wait, and neither should you. Turn on push notifications to stay informed. Every headline as it happens.
South Korea is now ruled by a radical socialist, and that government has put 2 and I think 3 pastors now in prison for their speaking out about what the government is doing. So we have this around the world. Voice of the Martyrs just said that Christian persecution is at an all-time high around the globe, and the most dangerous religion to be a part of is to be a Christian anywhere around the globe.
And most people don't even realize that, right? Because that's how it's been for some years now. Christianity is the most persecuted religion above all others.
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show. We're live on Worldview Tube and our X Spaces simulcast, and we're talking about the persecutions of Christians worldwide, and that it's dramatically on the rise now, with author of Canon Crossfire, Matthew McWhirter. Matthew, I wanted to show that clip because folks, I mean, a lot of folks in the American mind have this out of sight, out of mind type of thinking, you know, and they really aren't aware of what's going on with the rest of the world. But I think it's important for us as Christians in the body of Christ, the church in the United States, to have a good understanding of what's happening to others around the world. And I think most people would be surprised that the South Korean government is persecuting Christian pastors, putting them in prison.
It has a very large Christian population, large percentage of the population. It's not quite like the Philippines, which is almost entirely Christian country, but it's the closest one, I think, to the Philippines over there in Asia in terms of having that sort of percentage of Christians, etc. But it does have a horrific history of torturing Christians way back. Read about it. It is just awful what those people endured. So they had to overcome persecution to get to this point, but that doesn't mean that the persecution stops. It doesn't mean that feelings towards Christians have stopped. And certainly when you're dealing with, a government that views the Christians as the enemy or as opponents or as obstacles, whatever, to whatever it wants to do, that's when the claws come out. And that's what you're seeing there. And again, I don't know exactly what crimes those people were charged with, et cetera, but the usual method is to charge them with something that has nothing to do with what you're really doing, right? It is to charge somebody with a crime, any crime you can find, right, in order to get them in jail, and sometimes any crime you can make up in order to get them in jail, rather than what's really going on, which was you're persecuting them for their beliefs and what they had to say. And, that's a danger anywhere, because even if you have a relatively, you have a rule of law society, you have a democracy, you have rights, but you can hide behind stuff and misuse it in order to persecute somebody as well.
Is that why it's important to understand what you wrote about in your book, and the central core of your idea of your book is to have an understanding of what the early Christians wrote and thought about, all of these documented books of the Bible, whether it's a Catholic Bible or a Protestant Bible, and have an understanding of how that fits together? Is that why that's important?
Absolutely. And, you have the Bible, you have the early church, you have these periods of persecution, all showing you how Christians are supposed to act, what we're supposed to believe, how we're supposed to deal with these things. Those are all important. There's inspiration that you can take from it, but there's also just the sort of the warnings, right? The ability to see, well, this happened there, this could happen here, kind of thing that you can find as you're going through this stuff. The earliest days of Christianity in the Bible show you the persecution. John, the author, we believe, of the book of Revelations, was dipped in boiling oil, for example. They were dealing with this at the time. They were struggling, to understand what was going on. I mean, a lot of people thought Jesus was coming right back and didn't understand there would be a long stretch. And they had to deal with that, disappointment that some people were feeling, and explaining, well, no, the end of the world will come when the end of the world comes. But in the meantime, here we are, and we got to persevere and continue. And all of that as you know, resonates to us today, right? And we feel that we live in a better society, that we sort of have overcome some things, but the fact is that that's sort of paper thin. The nastiness of humanity is still out there. It still exists in our own society. We maintain defenses against it only as long as we're, on the defensive and vigilant. And the Bible talks about that, about being ready and being vigilant as you proceed through time, as the church proceeds through time, as Christians go through time, because this stuff never leaves you. Humanity is always a problem. Yesterday, today, and always.
Yeah. Yeah, you brought up that your society is really paper thin. I think a lot of people were surprised. I know I was a little bit surprised, not too much, but a little bit surprised during the pandemic at the local, state, and federal government's oppression of the church.
You could not have told people what was coming 5 years earlier and had anybody believe you. That, that we're going to shut down business, we're going to shut down churches, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. Like, no way. And 5 years later, that's what happened. And it's another way that you end up with the persecution, right? Is to declare an emergency, right?
Yeah.
Declare an emergency and then dictate a whole bunch of things that otherwise people would stop. And what happens is if you speak up against that, if you say, wait a minute, that's going too far, then all of a sudden, what were all the accusations? You're anti-science, you're killing people, you're endangering people, you're this, you're that. And it just becomes so hard to stand up for what's right in those circumstances. So, as you say, we didn't expect it. We went through it. Now that we went through it, I hope, at least you and I, who didn't quite expect it, we'll be more on our toes the next time something like that happens. And hopefully people in general are more on our toes and we can prevent it from happening the next time.
Yeah, the thing that surprised me the most about that era was the pastors that failed to recognize what was happening and got on board with the oppression. That really surprised me.
I had just become Christian. Like I was like, I was still in the early days. And remember, I knew nothing, right? So I didn't even realize you had to go to church. So I'm reading these books and thinking, well, I'll just be Christian here in my own home. And only when you get to the epistles do you start to understand why there's a church and why you're supposed to go and all that. So I eventually read my way into going to church. So I'm like, okay, I have to go to church. As soon as I start showing up to church, the church is basically shut down and banned. And all of the pastors and priests and everybody are okay with it. When I've just read all this stuff telling me you shouldn't be okay with it, this is what we're, the only thing we're supposed to be doing as Christians. It's a social religion. We have to participate as a group. And all of a sudden, I'm back to being a Christian in my own home and wondering what in the world just happened. It was just a bizarre experience to see that. But it's, that's also in the Bible. The book of Revelation shows you church after church. It's filled with problems. Peter and Paul have their disagreement in the book of Acts, etc. Like there's always factions within a church. There's always different viewpoints. And sometimes it's important for you to be Christian, even when your pastor would be telling you, disagreeing with the way that you're being Christian, etc. Sometimes you have to be willing to ride it out and wait for the pastor to see the light.
Yeah. Or just become the pastor, become the leader of the flock, just by doing what Christ asks us to do, which is witness for Him.
Absolutely.
It's interesting because I was shocked at some of these really well-known Christian leaders in America who just took a knee. And that's not the Jesus. And I want to get back to the softness and sensitivity training of some Christian body churches. And I think that probably led us down the road that came to that destination where you had Christian leaders that weren't tough and tough enough to recognize that this was happening.
Absolutely. And it's having that mental mindset of looking at something and saying, what's really going on here? What is this? What is the impact of this? That it's probably part of my biggest fear. I mean, when you look at these laws on silent prayer, They're what are they portrayed as? Well, we're protecting religion. We're enabling people to have freedom of consciousness, all this stuff. Like that's not how it works out. And you have to be able to sort of see how it's going to work out and recognize the threat, right? It's just simple threat recognition of what this is and what's really going on. And in the context of these pastors back in the pandemic, it just seems like some people were less focused on the sort of, I don't know what the right word is, but the procedural aspects of being Christian. They're talking about, the moral aspects, etc. But going to church on Sunday is a crucial thing. As I said, people went to church knowing the soldiers were outside and said, I am called to go to church on Sunday. I got to go to church. And they went, they were captured by the soldiers, tortured and killed, on the spot. That's the way it went. And to compare that to the pandemic is what? Like what am I seeing here? So
I remember we were still in Louisiana then, and there was a pastor in Baton Rouge that he said, we're going to have church, and he got arrested. And he got arrested more than once, I think. And they tried to put him in prison just for having church services. But the part I struggle with is that there was just so few of those that stood up. So we need to make sure that we've learned those really hard lessons from that era and teach that to our kids going forward, because things are getting tougher, Matthew, as you know. They're getting tougher. It's not just laws now. It's violence against Christians, and it's violence out of the blue. I don't think most Americans realize today that there is violence against Christians in their own country, because I don't know, it may, and we'll talk about this in the next segment in a little more depth, but maybe it's colored because of politics, because of people that were hurt, were being political, and those kind of things. And that's one of the things I wanted to ask you is, what does your research show about the political and the spiritual and how to be a Christian in that environment and fight for your beliefs in the political arena?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, that can come in many different flavors. You could be an excluded minority in your society where you have no political power, like the Jews and to some extent in the Roman Empire, where Jesus comes out of. You could be one that, you're just outvoted, right? Or you could be one that's are in control and able to change some things, etc. And, the Bible is not real clear on what your political duties are. You sort of translate from the teachings of the Bible to these circumstances that we find ourselves in, and then try to do that. And of course, there's differences of opinion as to how to do that, etc. But to me, it again just goes all the way back to the beginning of what are you taught to do as a Christian? What is Christianity at its core? And that is, to me, looking at as individuals as souls. Every person is a soul. They are somebody you are trying to convert, not somebody you're trying to run over and deal with. And that informs our view of human rights, how we treat people, how we talk to people, how we interact. I think that element of Christianity gets a little bit glossed over by modern Christians because it's just not called to our attention enough. For me as an outsider coming to it, it's a big shift to go from not really caring, the person in front of me is just, an obstacle to be, dealt with, as opposed to he's a soul that I'm supposed to be talking to, trying to show him how Christians really act, show him what it is. That is a big mental shift. And I find that a lot of people don't recognize that the non-Christian they're dealing with may not think that way, right? May not see you as a soul, may see you as an obstacle to be eliminated. And it's that element that sometimes leads you to be defenseless when they
absolutely right.
come after you.
Absolutely right. We got to take our last break. When we come back, we'll see another clip, but bringing it home to on the ground inside the territory of the United States of America, Christian persecution. We'll be right back with Matthew McWhirter.
Hello, I'm Brandon House. I want to thank you for all your support at WVWFoundation.com. that helps make possible pushing out 24/7 content for free. Without your support, we'd have to put it all behind a paywall. But thanks to you and your support through our foundation, we're able to push it out for free as a broadcast service and broadcast ministry of WVW Foundation. Please consider going there and setting up an automatic monthly contribution, or go there and make an occasional contribution. If you prefer to support us through the mail, you'll find our mailing address there at wvwfoundation.com. You can also call and make your contribution over the phone by calling 901-825-0652. That's 901-825-0652. Again, all these details are available at wvwfoundation.com. Thank you for your support as we try to help people around the world understand the times through the lens of a Christian worldview.
70 Christians were massacred in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Okay, this is we've got a story. Do we have the story here? I guess we don't. From the Associated Press. Well, luckily I've got at least a little phrase from it here. Open Doors field sources say the violence began at 4 a.m. on February 13th as militants captured and tied up some 20 Christians in the community of Meba. The militants are suspected to be members of the Allied Democratic Forces, a rebel group with ties to ISIS, to the Islamic State. They captured about 50 other Christians, tied them all up, and they took the 70 Christians to a Protestant church in Kasanga, where they were all killed inside with machetes and hammers. Very few people have covered this story. And there have been reports of other Christian persecutions, and there was actually a study, I believe it was by Pew Research, which showed that Christianity is the most persecuted religion in the world. That remains true. I think it's very important to shed light on this while we're talking about various identity groups and rights and the American empire and the shifting of the global order. It seems to be, whatever the political shift in recent decades, Christians are persecuted. They're subject to more persecution. In Iraq, in Syria, throughout the Levant, in Africa, well, in America, actually, because not to say that they're being rounded up, not to really draw much of a comparison, but there is political persecution of Christians in America under Joe Biden, who would spy on their churches, who would arrest them for praying and demonstrating outside of abortion mills. Same thing in the United Kingdom. So this is a global phenomenon. And it's a major problem because, as I've said on this show many times, quoting Cardinal Manning, all politics ultimately is theological. There's that clip that went viral yesterday. People are still talking about it, from Sarah Stock, saying that America is grounded in Christianity, in large part in Christianity. And the liberal that she was debating on the Jubilee podcast, Sam Sater, said, no, that's not true. It has nothing to do with Europe, has nothing to do with Christianity. And it obviously does. Until 1960, 93% of Americans were Christian. So when we're asking what's the new world order going to look like, ultimately you got to get down to this question: what do we believe? What do we believe most fundamentally? What do we stand for? Increasing Christian persecution, not a good sign for the world order.
Not a good sign for not only the world order, but the United States of America, this increasing Christian persecution. That's what we're talking about today here on Worldview Tube, the Rob Maness Show, and our X Spaces simulcast with the author of Canon Crossfire, Matthew McWhorter. And Matthew, I wanted to bring that home. That was Michael Knowles from Breitbart in his podcast. They're talking about an incident in the DRC. But at the end there, he came home to America and talked about the Biden administration and political persecution and those kind of things. But really, since Biden left office, it has gotten to the violence against Christians aspect that we hadn't really seen a whole lot before. From this perspective, we now have had the martyrdom of Charlie Kirk, who, and I was alluding to the fact that I think some people try to smooth that over from a political perspective because he was a conservative and outspoken and all that. But he was witnessing for Christ. He was witnessing the gospel of Jesus Christ, especially the last 2 years when he became a father and a husband in his way. And I think he was masterful at it because he went into political arenas and witnessed the gospel of Jesus Christ there. And I think he was martyred for that. And then this Brown University student that was killed, one of the two that died, it's looking like maybe she was targeted. And she was a very devout Christian, according to the friends that have been interviewed on that. But again, there's a political aspect to it because she was the vice president of the Brown University College Republicans. That's mixed into it. Maybe that's just because we have a lot of faith-based individuals that are in the Republican Party than maybe the Democrat Party does. I don't know, but I think the Christianity is a root cause of this, and it's now home here in America, and we have to be on guard for it.
Yeah, and so several things. I mean, number one is it's more widespread than people realize because lots of churches don't report incidents. They're trying not to cause trouble, not to make things worse than they are. So they just sort of quietly inform the police without an actual police report, or they even keep things inside themselves. And I know everyone's always shocked when something makes the news, but the church I go to is attacked all the time, and it's never in the news. But it's because they don't want to cause trouble. They don't want to have problems in the neighborhood, so they just sort of deal with it internally and clean up the mess and stuff. But our stained glass windows, our statues, etc., have all been attacked. I also think you see when people have political power, they use the political means. When they're out of power, they use non-political means for the persecution. Not to accuse everybody who voted for, Joe Biden or whatever, but when they had that route of doing the persecution through that, they used it. And when they don't, a small minority take things into their own hands and do horrible things because they're now on the outside. But the persecution comes one way or the other. And, obviously this sort of violence is, shocking. And as you say, another way that people don't recognize what's going on is because it's portrayed as if it's political when it's sort of a merger of both at most, and often it's purely religious. Like I sincerely doubt that someone's view on tax policy is why the enemy hated them so much and shot them in the head. I have a suspicion that it has to do with other things besides pure politics, right?
Yeah, look, just thinking about it, this popped into my mind as you were talking there. Even the crucifixion of Jesus was a mixture of the political and persecution based on his beliefs and his actions. So, yeah, it's very interesting. Well, we've got a live audience, and I've got a question over there in the live audience. We'll go ahead and go over to them and let them ask you this question. Go ahead, Shell.
We have AJ, sir.
Thank you, Shell. Thank you, Colonel. My question to your guest is, do you think the notion of turning the other cheek needs to be revisited and sort of dusted off and retaught to the masses? Because from my chair, I believe it has been watered down to a point where turning the other cheek is synonymous with surrendering. Looking forward to your response. Thank you.
Yeah, Jesus said, turn the other cheek. And then when he was slapped, he did not turn the other cheek. He asserted his rights and said, why do you slap me? The Bible's filled with all sorts of things that are not real. I don't view them as conflicting advice, but it's sort of a circle of advice. It's, there's a time and a place for everything. There's a situation where you should turn the other cheek in reality, and it's time and a place where that is not really what you're supposed to be doing. And certainly I see a huge difference between defending myself versus defending others, for example. It's one thing to turn the cheek for yourself, but to turn the cheek for others, you got to stand up for them. And as I say, Jesus stood up for himself under certain circumstances. So I just find that people take one word or one phrase out of the Bible and make way too much of it. You're looking for the whole truth, not just that little piece of truth. And when you look at the whole truth, it's a much more complicated and frankly fascinating and wonderful picture to me than just let's always turn the cheek and become pacifists and meekly accept persecution, etc. Like that's not what the Bible calls for.
Yeah, I was listening to a sermon one time about that very thing, turning the other cheek, and what was said. And this pastor went back to the Greek, and he said, really, when you read it from the Greek, what he was saying was turn the other cheek and let them strike that one too, an act of defiance instead of an act of contrition or meekness.
Yeah, exactly. And it's all, turning the other cheek to, Heinrich Himmler, bad idea. Turning the other cheek to some people could change things. It's the right time, the right place for everything. And I think that that's an aspect of Christian teaching that gets lost on people, that, you almost always find sort of the opposite somewhere in the Bible. And what it's really telling you is to think carefully, view everybody as a soul, and do the best thing in that particular circumstance, and not to just blindly follow a rule and end up hurting yourself through the turning of the cheek, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're coming down to the end, Matthew, and I have this other question left. And what is it that surprised you the most in your research for the book Cannon Crossfire? I think it's a fascinating approach to it, and needed, really, to have a new Christian come in and do this level of in-depth study and then publish it, what they learned. What was the thing that surprised you the most that you learned from the early Christians?
Like I said, it's this martyrdom aspect was just a shock to me. You heard about it, but you thought it was a minor thing. You think it's, a rare thing, and to find out it's actually was the majority of these fathers that I'm reading, their lives ended horribly. And to just discover that was just such a shock. But then to read what they wrote on their way to that martyrdom, read what they're preaching to other martyrdoms, was so fulfilling, so wonderful to see that, the depth of their Christianity, their focus on it being true, their focus on finding the truth, and being willing to die for that. That to me it just was unexpected. It was like a treasure to uncover it, even though it was horrible for them personally. For me and my faith, it was wonderful.
Yeah, the ones that I've read about, I mean, they focused on spreading the gospel of Jesus Christ the most whenever they were communicating with other human beings, even in this process, as just like Jesus did from the cross, even.
And the word martyr means witness. The whole point is that as they were being tortured and killed, they were still preaching. They didn't stop. They preached to the torturer.
Yep, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for coming on and doing this show with us today. It's fantastic, and it'll be around on my archives anyway, and I'll get it published digitally and everything. How can folks find you, and more importantly, how can they find the book, and anything else you want to tell them?
CannonCrossfire.com. So it's Canon of Scripture, CANON, just one N in the middle. CannonCrossfire.com. That'll send you to the cheapest price to get the book anywhere. If you want a Kindle version, go straight to Amazon. Otherwise, you can choose where to buy the physical version. I have large print and audiobooks for people who have trouble reading, free copies for seminarians. So check out the website. It also includes a free sample of the book for those who are interested. So best place, just go to the website, and it'll show you where to go from there.
Well, thank you very much, sir. We appreciate your work, and I'll be talking about it frequently. I think it's a great subject. It needs to be explored. It needs to be studied by those of us that have been Christians for a long time, probably more than anybody else. Merry Christmas to you and yours, sir, and God bless you.
Thank you. God bless, and Merry Christmas to you, too.
All right, folks. Tomorrow, Truth Thursday, we'll have Margot from North Carolina is on location at AmFest, and we'll be live from there for the whole show. I'll see you then.